It is now Christmas. It's a Christmas season. I had my Christmas party yesterday, which is why I sound so bad, and probably look just as bad, if not worse. But it's obviously a very stressful time for people financially. I have put quite a bit of money aside for Christmas, and I'm still worried it's not going to be enough because we've got to buy dinner for everyone, and we've got
Yeah.
11 people coming to the house and all that, and then you've got presents and everything else that happens. So Kieran, give me your advice to somebody who is on the run up to Christmas and going, I am slightly worried about what it's going to do to my finances.
Sure. So if we take a step back and go, why is this period of the year particularly difficult? And as we think about going into the new year, so one of the biggest reasons for that is kind of how pay works throughout December and January. And because of people going away on leave, payroll and things is often earlier in the month in December than it is in other months. And so you will likely get paid mostly pre-Christmas, sometimes even a bit earlier. And so it makes that period across December and January feel really, really long. And whereas normally your budget kind of extends, or your kind of pay and therefore budget extends across maybe a month period, it feels like over the course of this period, and it doesn't just feel like it has to cover a longer period, maybe 5, maybe 6 weeks. So I think that is why this exists. And the reasons companies do this is, so people don't have to work over Christmas and do payroll and all of those types of stuff. But one of the reasons why I think there is a lot of financial anxiety during this period is because everything that we are targeted with is around consumption and spending. Pretty much. And before it started at the end of November with Black Friday, but Black Friday seems to have extended longer and longer and longer, and starting maybe middle, even beginning of November. And then by the time you get into Christmas, and then you get into Boxing Day sales, and then you get into New Year sales. And so there is always a reason to consume and spend. And so, and it's hard to avoid. I'm guilty of it. None of us are perfect, and we are all kind of guilty of maybe having a bit of FOMO on certain deals, or maybe having an eye on something. And so, all of these factors kind of create a bit of a perfect storm to really create a lot of kind of financial anxiety and stress around what should be a joyous, happy time of the year. So one of the things that I would always recommend for anyone in terms of managing finances across this part of the year is to firstly always set aside money for those fixed costs that you have, right? So whether that be mortgage or rent, utilities, broadband, any other kind of fixed cost you have. Because if you don't automatically put this money away, either in a separate account or in a separate pot or something like that, this money can easily be swallowed up through all of the different shopping and experiences and time with family, etc., that you spend. So by having that money separate, that whether it be for December or for January, that money is already set aside to pay for those kind of fixed expenses, so there's not going to be any issue that you have in terms of paying those. And then you've got kind of the rest of the income to decide what you want to do with, whether that's saving, spending, whatever it might be. And I think, it's also really important to remember around this time of the year that it's kind of, I feel like it's okay to spend a little bit more. This is a really important time of the year when it comes to social relationships, family relationships, friends, and spending money on those things is also really important to all of us. And so whilst you may have been stricter in other months, I think it's absolutely okay, during these months to be a little bit looser, but being a little bit looser, but responsibly looser, rather than kind of being irresponsibly looser. And that's why moving money aside for those fixed expenses immediately from your paycheck is a way to kind of protect yourself against that. And then the other thing that I would recommend in terms of kind of managing money during this period of time is I read an interesting term around this time of the year and linked to kind of spending more. It was called spending momentum. Once you are in the momentum of spending, kind of basically starting in November with Black Friday, then Christmas parties come, and then Christmas presents come, and then Boxing Day sales come, and then going out with friends and family over the festive period comes, and then we're into the new year, and New Year sales are coming, and you want to book a holiday because you're looking forward to the rest of the year, right? There is a real like snowballing of spending across this period, and it can really create a lot of stresses into 2026 or into the new year for you. So one of the things that I would always recommend is try and find ways to kind of either control or rein back in that spending momentum. So try and delay any spending that you may want kind of as far down into January as possible, because at that point you're kind of closer to the next payday, if that's kind of how you're budgeting or managing your money. And many of the deals and offers that the kind of retailers put out kind of often run through January anyway, because January is slow for retail, for any kind of merchants really, right? Because people are spending less. People have just, over excessed in December, etc. So many of the sales and discounts sometimes even get better during January. And so kind of waiting to maybe the middle, towards the end of January, to actually making some of those purchases, if those are still things that you want. Because I don't know, maybe it seems good when the initial sale or offer is on, but maybe as time passes, you maybe think about it more and you go, actually, is that a good use of money? So there's another kind of additional benefit of that as well. But I think that is a good way to slow down the spending momentum. And kind of make sure that you're giving yourself, enough leeway from a financial perspective to kind of cover yourself for January as well, because you still have to live in January. It isn't just about living in December. There's still travel in January. The world doesn't stop. So we have to keep kind of spending and living our lives. So slowing down that spending momentum is a really kind of helpful way to make sure that you don't get into too much kind of financial stress, particularly towards the end of January before that next payday arrives.
That's a fantastic term, spending momentum, and I would admit I've experienced that, and I'm probably in it right now. I also one of the things I struggle with, and apparently this is quite a common ADHD trait, which is that kind of spending for habit, which is something that a lot of people with ADHD do, which is they're almost in a consumption habit rather than a conscious decision making process. And as a lot of people I've spoken to, which is actually the breaking of the habit is what you need to control. And for me, what works for me around Christmas is creating an Excel spreadsheet of everybody I'm buying presents for. I write my ideas down, because I don't know exactly what I want to buy my niece, but I've got some ideas in, needs to be Minecraft themed or whatever that might be. And then I will set myself a kind of budget per person. And then go from there, because there are hierarchies. You'll spend more, than somebody else's kids. So, and that's just a reality of it that people just need to unfortunately swallow and just go, this is what I'm looking to spend, and then put the ideas in the spreadsheet. So don't just add them to basket, put them in the spreadsheet. So you still keep hold of them, and then you can do a bit more of a review. And that works really well for me, because I get the psychological buzz of the shopping, but I'm actually spending the money, because I'm doing the window shopping in quite a lot of detail, and you still get in that buzz of this is this is happening. But one of the things that I think a lot of people will struggle with over the December period is going, this is very expensive, I'm going to put it on the credit card. What are your kind of views on that, and people who put Christmas on credit? You talk about the holidays as well. So obviously the consumer advice is to put your holiday on a credit card, because you get the consumer protection of it. But what would your advice to be, somebody is buying the family Christmas turkey on a credit card because that's how they have to balance their budget and manage their money? Would you give people any advice, kind of whether that's product or some habits to help them, particularly if they're having to do Christmas on credit?
Yeah, absolutely. Just coming back to the point you made earlier around creating the Excel spreadsheet, I think that is a fantastic idea. And I think the reason that is a fantastic idea is because it makes your spending a bit more conscious. And I think one of the bits that many people struggle with is you kind of just go out onto Oxford Street and you start looking for things and buying things, and it becomes, that's when you kind of get into a momentum of spending, whereas actually just taking that time to sit down and even structure it by person, by budget, etc., your spending then becomes a little bit conscious, and actually it's okay to spend money, it's okay to buy presents, personal finance and all of the stuff that we talk about isn't about not spending and not celebrating with your family, but doing it in a conscious way, so you know what you're doing and you can do it in a responsible way, like using the way that you suggested, I think is a fantastic idea, and I think something that a lot of people could do. And it doesn't have to be super detailed, it doesn't have to be, you know, a big Notion database or some fancy Excel spreadsheet, right? But just being conscious about who you're buying for, how much you want to spend on them, etc., is a really important first step to stop things snowballing, and getting yourself into a tough situation. So on that bit, so credit cards is an interesting one, right? And I am a big proponent of the Martin Lewis way of thinking when it comes to credit cards, which is credit cards are absolutely fine and they absolutely have a place, and they absolutely should be used. With the big but, they must be paid off in full every single month, right? And I think that is the most important part, because what we don't want to do also as well is, you know, not be able to pay those balances off going into the new year, and you really start the new year off, you know, with so much kind of you know, on one hand you might have so much ambition and drive for the new year, but on the other hand you're starting off from a financial perspective in a kind of almost a negative standpoint, when you're figuring out how to manage paying that credit card off, maybe over a couple of different months, maybe researching which credit cards you can do balance transfers for and all of that type of stuff. And I think that's where it starts getting a bit sticky. So when it comes to purchasing, whether it be the Christmas turkey, whether it be Christmas presents, like for the consumer protection that you offered, and you know, even if you have things like American Express and things like that, there are offers and stuff that you can use again to reduce the amount that you're either paying for some of these presents or things that you're buying, or maybe you're able to get additional things. So credit cards absolutely have a place, but I think I personally am very firm on it with myself, and anybody I talk to about this, again, like as I said, pretty kind of firm on the idea that credit cards are absolutely fine, but they must be kind of paid off in full. And I think the intersection between credit cards and buy now, pay later as well is also really interesting, because I think many people kind of maybe see them as different things, but ultimately they're exactly the same thing, just they're packaged in slightly different ways. And I think one of the big differences is, you know, if I look at many retailers and kind of e-commerce businesses, the buy now, pay later kind of customer journey is so baked into the checkout process now that it is very easy, you know, some of them without even having to create an account or anything like that, right? Like, you know, at least with a credit card, you have to go and do an application. You have to, you know, receive the credit check outcome. You then have to receive the credit card. You know, there's still a bit of a process there. Whereas actually that friction to using the buy now, pay later services is basically zero, almost. And so it's very tempting. And again, I think the buy now, pay later stuff, I do think it has a place in terms of kind of purchasing and retail, not just in the Christmas period of time, but all throughout the year, because again, it is a way to kind of help smooth the impact to your kind of monthly finances. But again, it has to come down to a conscious understanding of, okay, if it's pay in four, for example, that I know that it's not just this month that I can afford the installment divided by 4, but also in the next kind of 4 months as well. So I think they absolutely have a place, but they should always be used with caution, and with credit cards paying off in full, because managing the debt onwards as well also becomes a really time consuming activity and stress inducing activity as well, whether it be transferring from card to card, whether it be sorting out payment plans, etc. And you know, that's where it starts to get messy, and that's where people start to lose control, etc. So I think that would be my advice to anyone considering thinking about using credit cards or maybe even buy now, pay later services over this period.
I make a very conscious decision to not do New Year's resolutions on New Year, because January is so miserable. And I think what you were saying about people start the year almost setback is so demoralizing. I always find doing my New Year's resolutions on February the 1st is actually a lot better for me and a much kind of cleaner start.
Yeah.
Trying to do anything in January is just painful, and I think there's obviously so much pressure for people to kind of get stuff in order in January, and actually my advice, and I've given this advice to my wife as well, which is January is just the reset month, and then we start and we can build from February the 1st. And one of the things that a lot of people will be trying to do in the new year will be save more money. And obviously with the budget, a couple of weeks ago, there were changes to individual savings accounts or ISAs, where the amount you can keep in cash is going to be reduced to £12,000 of the £20,000 allowance. So, Tommy, if you give me your views on that as a policy, and maybe some alternatives if people do want to save, where they should be putting their money away.
Yeah. So, really interesting, I guess, policy change by the government, and I think one that's maybe kind of actually well overdue, in terms of its intention and outcome. I think the current proposed method of achieving that outcome is probably a little bit confusing and has created maybe some unintended consequences when it comes to complexity for what it might mean in terms of people trying to find loopholes or kind of circumnavigating some of these rules. But I think the cut in, so the idea of getting people more into investing is absolutely fully behind that, and all of the content I create is kind of pushing the same message, right? So I'm really happy that we have the government and so many people now talking about investing. I think there is still a big gap in terms of education of where to invest, how to invest, what to invest in, etc., that I think needs to happen pretty quickly I think particularly over 26, given these changes coming from kind of April 27, so that people don't feel that this is a kind of a restriction rather than it is a kind of an opportunity. And I think that's probably where the biggest risk of this lies, because I think if people are afraid or scared or uneducated or don't feel confident in investing, that's where we might see some of the frustration, where they go, well, I want to put £20,000 into an ISA, and we have to put this in perspective as well. Saving £20,000 a year is really difficult as well, and so many people. I don't know the stats specifically around it, but I'm sure many people aren't able to save anywhere near that. And so, actually for many people, the £12,000 cash ISA limit might actually be okay. I think the couple of ideas that I had in terms of how this might be implemented that I think might have better outcomes would have been maybe an additional allowance for stocks and shares ISA. So, maybe even something like £2,000. I don't think it has to be extortionate, but an additional kind of incentive to go, okay, well, because then it becomes educate yourself, and there is a benefit of educating yourself, whereas this feels like educate yourself or else. And I think that's kind of what I don't like. And I think particularly some of the wording that we use here in the UK from a regulatory perspective around investing, I think also needs to change, because I think it is quite fear-inducing, particularly to the kind of average person. And so I think there is a lot of work needed by the government over the next year. And it's not only the government's responsibility, it's yours and I's responsibility, and others as well, to kind of educate people and to maybe remove some of the mystery or kind of or points around investing that maybe aren't so true. The other kind of way that I thought could have been implemented as well, which could have been a really interesting implementation of kind of a way to get more people investing, was similar to what's been proposed in the US with the Trump account. I'm not sure if I agree on the name, but where an account would be created for each new child born, and $1,000 or £1,000 would be in the UK's case, would be put in that account and invested, in their case, in US equities, which could have been the case here in the UK, where it could have been invested in UK equities. And then at 18 or 21, whatever the age is, that child then has that money, and that money's been invested and growing for them and then you can put extra money in that, right, in terms of either through a salary sacrifice from the employer, or as an individual if you want to invest more into that. So we already have things like the junior stocks and shares ISAs and stuff, but the reason why I really like that idea is because you've completely removed the barrier to investing. And I think what you will see is, in that case, parents seeing this account, and you will see the growth that happens over the course of the years. And then again, that becomes I should participate in this because there's a benefit. And I think that actually is a really clever approach to getting more. It's kind of a bit of an indirect approach to getting people investing, whereas I think the UK's approach is a little bit more direct. But I think that's a great opportunity way to show the benefits of investing. And I think one of the things that the government, there's been a lot of talk about this kind of cash ISA, stocks and shares ISA limit that's been introduced. But I think one of the things that's been underplayed a little bit is the benefits of investing. So people are lots of aware, and there's been lots of talk about the amount that you can only put in the cash ISA, but we see that returns over a longer period of time are better in investing in stocks and shares than they are in regular savings accounts. And so there is a benefit there for people, and whilst there is absolutely risks that people should be aware of, and we're going to be looking at things over a longer time period and a longer horizon, there is a benefit there for people in terms of putting money in stocks and shares. And I think the rhetoric's been kind of dominated by seeing this as a negative thing, whereas actually I think there is a big positive that maybe the government aren't leaning on enough, which is, we want you to have greater returns. This is kind of the government talking to the public, and investing is a way to achieve that. Yes, it comes with some risks, and in the short term things may go down, but I think that is a really important story to tell. But that obviously has to be equipped with the education behind that, around where to invest, how to invest, all of that type of stuff. And I think where it's going at the moment is a little bit concerning, which is like a lot of the talk around, you can't transfer money from stocks and shares ISAs to cash ISAs anymore, even if you're under 65. What do you do with the uninvested money in the stocks and shares ISA? And I think the way the government have chose to address this outcome of getting more people investing has unnecessarily created more complexity. And I don't think with any of these things, with most of the policies they implemented, they're kind of coming in kind of 27 and beyond. So I do think there's chance for actually some change in everything that they announced. And I think this might be one area where there may be a bit of change before it's actually implemented, just because I think they are creating a bit of complexity that isn't needed or necessary.
Well, let's go into that in a bit more detail, but on a broader horizon, in terms of how the government has been talking about personal finances, particularly through the media, because I have very strong opinions on this, being a financial services PR guy and been involved in politics previously. My view on it is that there's been a much more considered approach to the communications in order to not spook the markets. They basically had a look at what Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss did and gone completely the opposite. And in order to not spook the markets on budget day, by drip feeding ideas out, you get a lot more, you smooth out any market movements, because essentially the speculation beforehand actually is will move the markets, and then when budget day is announced and you realize that actually everything's a bit softer than was speculated, the markets are nice and calm, which obviously does a fantastic thing for gilt yields, brings the gilt yield down, which then lowers government debt, which is a massive balancing act of and not a lever that a Chancellor of the Exchequer can pull anymore, with England being independent. But what's your view on it?
So I think it's really interesting, and everything you mentioned, I think again is very considered. I don't think any of the drip feeds of information was unintentional. I think it was all very intentional, and I think by that point you kind of bake in what the market expects to come out of the budget, and so you're when there's kind of no surprises, the confidence is greater, and you then expect to see less wild changes when it comes to budget day. And obviously with the OBR report coming out early as well, that was I don't know, I think that genuinely felt like a mistake, but again, it kind of just confirmed everything we already knew. I think about it more interestingly in terms of the kind of public perception around a lot of those changes. And I think you're right. There was absolutely one intention of drip feeding information to kind of calm the markets and let them know what to expect. But I also think there was a bit of preparing the public and maybe suggesting things that maybe were never going to be in the actual budget as a way to have a kind of comparison of it could have been this bad, but it's only this. And so I think there was a lot of there has been, and there is still, I think, a lot of that going on in terms of the government using that information as a way to test ideas, as a way to gain what public reaction to a certain change or certain policy change may be. And I think that's what we saw a bit of in the Commons on the budget day, because traditionally, and I agree that the way it should be is that we elect these members of parliament to represent us in that forum, and so they should be the people that are informed around what the changes are, and then that's kind of how the drip feed of information and should work. Whereas in this kind of modern day world, it's really difficult to do that, and I think there was a very intentional thing that the Labour government did in terms of drip feeding all of that information to gain what the kind of public sentiment over certain changes were, and to ultimately maybe paint them in a better light when the actual changes announced were maybe less extreme, maybe, or kind of just generally a bit milder than what was suggested. But I think this also has a really kind of really important and significant kind of other consequence as well. And we've seen, lots of people withdraw large amounts of money from their pensions, for example, based on kind of the rumor mill of what might be happening to, tax-free pension lump sums and things like that. And people acting based on rumors or kind of what's coming out in the media. And I think that is also a really dangerous kind of side effect of this kind of government's approach to kind of drip feeding information, because people are acting on kind of unconfirmed information, and people making some really significant financial choices and decisions that are going to really shape their life for now and for the future as well, based on information that's not confirmed. And I think that is really dangerous, and I think a really something that really needs to be managed, and the government and the media kind of outlets, I think, need to really hold themselves responsible on that. And when we're reporting about all of these, kind of being really explicit, like how we have to be when we're talking about finance, and we have to say this is not financial advice. I think the government and the media outlets need to be very specific around that. This is all not confirmed information. This is speculation or rumors or whatever the terminology they want to use is, because I do think people get into a stage of fear, and they maybe make decisions or take actions from a financial perspective that maybe otherwise they shouldn't, or maybe is not necessarily right for their situation, their goals and things like that. So I do think, whilst there are some positives of the drip feed of information, I do think there are some negatives as well that we need to just be really conscious and aware of.
I think there's a personal responsibility to be had as well, because what is announced on that Wednesday at 12:30 in the budget, it doesn't happen immediately. And if people are making decisions based on the rumor before the budget anyway, that's pretty silly. And people do just need to educate themselves about how the process actually works, because it isn't that fast. My concern, kind of, politically and economically speaking, is this kind of drip feed approach. It doesn't make the decision makers look competent. It looks like they're essentially doing a large focus group. The other thing, and this has been a big talking point for a lot of people recently, and I even heard Jeremy Corbyn say this, which I think is one of the only things he's got right in the last 10 years, which is nobody knows what this government's vision is. Nobody can go like that. You know, there was in the Blair years, it was tackling child poverty. It was devolving powers away from Westminster. It was ensuring the safety net was there for, you know, the poorest in society, and then the, you know, various civil liberty things that came in. It felt very clear, and I think Alistair Campbell said we had those 5 points, and they were your 5 points that you really enforce. If there was, and I think this is the other way it feeds in for me, into a lack of vision, but it also means when they're drip feeding these things, it doesn't feel like there is an end goal for something really substantial. For example, overhauling the stamp duty system, you know, fundamental pension reform. These are things that require big ideas and confidence that is not coming through this kind of drip feed approach. However, I think they are also using a similar tool in the budget, because the mansion tax and the EV charges seem completely unworkable. And I think they're set to come in 2028.
Yeah.
I have a hunch, you know, you'll be 2 years away from re-election, that these will be essentially political levers. They'll go, we don't need to bring in the mansion tax because we've done such a good job on the economy. So I think there's a lot of this where people need to almost read between the lines a bit and go,
yes,
we're creating the headline so that we can give ourselves a big pat on the back in a couple of years' time, which again is not laying the groundwork for me for something big coming like pension reform that fundamentally is going to change the country's finances for decades to come, which probably does need to happen. And again, that then speaks to me as a lack of big vision. But I do appreciate your point on you know, trying to, you know, say it's going to be this bad, and then when it's only this bad, it doesn't feel all that bad. But what would you say about some of those announcements that were made? You know, things like the EV mileage charge, where apparently you're going to have to go to an MOT garage every year from you know, how, when you read that, what's your opinion of it?
Yeah, I think you're right in that. I think this government is trying to, like, I guess, compromise too much in terms of trying to please everyone. And I think, without going into, you know, this could be a politics conversation, right? I think this is the kind of the outcome of everyone essentially converging around the center, right? And so actually what you're trying to do is please everybody. And I think the EV charging one is a really interesting one, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it's one of those things that in practice doesn't work. I saw something that said, well, what happens when I don't need to MOT my car for the first 3 years when I don't have it? You know, all of those types of things, right? And so, and this is again where, you know, I think people are, you know, we're all a bit more switched on maybe than maybe we otherwise were when it comes to some of these kind of changes. That we already know that, as you say, it's either going to be a political lever, it's going to be something that's unworkable, or there's going to be some other alternative way that they actually, you know, get the kind of tax revenue. So I think that was why we've seen some of these kind of announcements like take effect from 2027, 2028, 2029, etc. And I do, given the kind of rocky last maybe 6 months or a year that the Labour Party has had, I do think there's there's some definitely planning happening for already the next election cycle in terms of ways to, and humans do this, right? Which is why I think that the government are doing this is that kind of whole comparison bit, right? It could have been the EV charge, but it's not, you know, and again, that becomes then a political lever. I think the EV charge is a really interesting one. And again, it comes to your point, a very valid point that you made around what the actual goal or outcomes of this government are. Because I then look at also in London with the congestion charge being introduced for EVs. I'm like, what is the outcome that we are ultimately trying to achieve here? Like, is it like kind of mass adoption of EVs? If it is, none of these things kind of support that. Is it kind of, you know, reducing pollution and emissions and things like that? Okay. If that is, again, not sure this necessarily addresses that. And so it's kind of hard for it's really hard for people to make decisions as well, when it comes to kind of longer term decisions and things like with EVs. With cars, maybe it doesn't matter so much, but like you mentioned, with kind of pensions and things like that, without these kind of long term kind of cross party reforms, it's really difficult for people to plan for the long term, because this government will be in charge for, I don't know, another 2 years, for example, maybe 3, but then we may have a change of government, and how can we ask people to confidently plan for their finances for the future when there is very likely to be U-turn on the kind of own policies that the Labour government put into place, let alone if another party comes into power, and who knows what they might announce, and so I do think it's becoming harder and harder to do kind of long-term planning, especially from a personal finance perspective. Like pensions is the kind of the most long-term thing that we're really doing, and I do think maybe there's some scope for kind of some of these wider reforms to happen, maybe kind of agnostic of party, and there to be kind of some reform that happens like independent of the government. But again, how that's workable, no idea. And I'm sure there will be plenty of things that need to happen by that. But I do think it's become very difficult to kind of plan for the long term, with some of these changes, and like you said, some of them maybe being U-turned in the future. I do think that we, as the kind of civilians, are really the kind of biggest losers in this, because we are having to be quite reactive. And that's where maybe we lose out on some of the kind of longer term gains from being maybe invested in something for a long period of time, or working towards a specific goal over a really long period of time. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with how this government at least seems to be approaching some of these kind of like policy changes and things like that.
Just to finish on, because one of the reasons I started teaching about money and started to write down all these things I'd learned from working in financial services and not having any education in personal finance at all was I didn't want my son to make the same mistakes I felt I'd had. And is there a lesson or a couple of things you wish you could go back and tell 18-year-old Kieran and go, if you just have these little nuggets, they're going to make your financial health a lot better, but also I think the other thing that people maybe don't directly appreciate, but is such a driving factor for me in planning my finances is stress, and reducing stress as much as possible. So if you could go back and tell 18-year-old Kieran, do this or don't do this to help your financial future, what would that be?
So I think there's probably 2 things that I would tell myself or tell others in kind of at that age group or in that position in life. So I think the first one is to is all around education. I think particularly as we are younger, all of our kind of perspectives and views on money are either from our parents or from our close friends or close family, or kind of maybe even starting to see what we see on social media, and that's kind of, that's very natural and things like that. But actually, it's kind of taking the time to understand and have a think about what's important to you, and what kind of financial products or services or things that are available can support what you want to do, rather than just following what maybe worked for your parents or what your parents decided to do, or whatever. So I think, I was guilty of that, right? I just did what my parents I saw them doing and what they told me to do, right? There wasn't a bit in my brain that said that actually, why am I doing the things that they said? They were in a very different position in life, and they had very different goals to the ones that I have. So why am I kind of following the same kind of strategies and things that they are doing? So I think that's one bit, and kind of take the time to educate yourself in what's available and what would best work for your situation, and what you kind of want to be ambitious for, and what your goals are. And the second one, I don't know, maybe it's finance related, maybe it's not, but it's that time is plentiful. In that when you're 18, it feels like you've got this like really short window to like earn loads of money, and you kind of want to like work really hard or save really hard or whatever, and like you think that time is so short, but actually there's plenty of years to earn money, to let money grow, to save money, etc. And that actually there may be years in your early 20s, for example, where actually you're not really maybe earning that much, and so therefore it's okay to maybe sacrifice those years to doing other things that you maybe enjoy, whether that be trying out a hobby or maybe trying your chance at some sort of idea that you might have, or whatever it might be. And that to not kind of get caught up in this kind of I must earn quickly, I must kind of save and invest quickly, and I must have this size portfolio, this size house by this age, etc. That time is plentiful, and there is plenty of time to earn money. There's plenty of time to spend money and then earn it back. Those are all kind of lessons that I'm learning now, kind of now that I'm in my 30s as well, and kind of looking back at that time period as well, and kind of understanding and that there is plenty of time, and anything that you may lose or spend can absolutely be earned back, and then there is plenty of time for that. So I think those are the two things that I would probably go back and educate kind of 18-year-old Kieran on.